This is the artificial intelligence voice of Dr. Peter Attia narrating this pod slice summary of the Drive podcast. In this engaging discussion between Dr. Peter Attia and Arthur Brooks, they delve into the nuanced understanding of happiness beyond transient feelings. Or Brooks encourages listeners to take charge of their health and happiness, treating life as a startup. As a CEO focuses on doing what's right rather than what feels good in the moment. Both health and happiness are deemed facets of one's happy spans in a pursuit that requires discipline and conscious decision-making. Brooks dismisses the common misconception of equating feelings with happiness, when instead he suggests that feelings are merely the manifestation of happiness or its evidence. He underlines how factors like sleep quality, food intake, or a spat with a spouse manipulate one's feelings, but do not inherently dictate the actual state of one's happiness. He further introduces the concept of hardwiring of basic human emotions in our brains, distinguishing positive from negative ones. Negative emotions, fear, anger, sadness, and disgust, have evolved for survival, acting as mechanisms to alert, protect, and guide us. Basic positive emotions like joy and interest drive personal growth and learning. Joy, often associated with reward, is stimulated upon accomplishing a task or reuniting with loved ones, stimulating the brain's reward system, the ventral striatum. Interest, on the other hand, is derived from the intense pleasure experienced when learning something new. While Brooks also sheds light on metacognition, the higher-order psychological phenomenon where we acknowledge and interpret our own emotions predominantly using the prefrontal cortex of the brain. It's this ability that allows us to manage adverse emotions, transforming an activity-inducing pain, like a cold plunge, into an enjoyable experience if channelized correctly. He continues to examine the evolvement of sadness, explaining how the brain struggles to mitigate the pain of losing a loved one, hence leading to grief. Its agonizing repetition pulsates the dorsal anterior singular cortex until the brain coping mechanism is fully operational. In sum, the understanding of happiness goes beyond emotions, and it's our ability to be metacognitive that allows us to manage our happiness effectively. In the following portion of the podcast, Brooks delves deeper into the fundamental human emotions and the evolution of their intensity within individuals. And he introduces a system to categorize individuals based on the intensity of their positive and negative emotion. The mad scientists, the cheerleaders, the poets, and the judges. This mood type classification paints a broad picture on how one's emotional intensity plays out in daily life. And mad scientists exhibit above-average intensities for both positive and negative emotions. The cheerleaders, the ideal category for most from an emotional perspective, exhibit above-average positive intensity and below-average negative intensity. Poets are described as individuals experiencing above-average negative intensity while scoring below average in positive intensity. Lastly, the judges are individuals who are low in intensity for both positive and negative emotions, enabling them to offer excellent judgment under a variety of circumstances as they tend not to be overwhelmed by emotions. Brooks emphasizes that understanding this emotional categorization play a significant role in managing one's happiness. He further demonstrates the heritability of self-evaluated well-being through a range of identical twin studies. These studies show that between 44 and 52 of self-evaluated well-being is inherently inherited. In other words, genetic predisposition immensely contributes to one's mood balance and overall happiness levels. An interesting revelation Brooks brings to light is the compatibility between different mood types, especially in personal relationships. So surprisingly, compatibility is not about having maximum common ground. Instead, a successful partnership relies on achieving a baseline of compatibility over which complementarity qualities completing one another should exist. For instance, an extrovert may pair better with an introvert rather than another extrovert, providing the balance in the relationship dynamics. And asked about personal management of his mad scientist emotional type, Brooks highlights the importance of self-regulation and mental habits. Understanding one's emotional tendencies based on the knowledge of science and practical applications is pivotal for effective self-management. Dr. Peter Attia and Arthur Brooks discuss the ideas of human emotions and their intensities, dubbing it as the mood type. Brooks identifies 4 main types of these emotional intensities: the mad scientists, the cheerleaders, the poets, and the judges. Mad scientists tend to experience extreme highs and lows, while the cheerleaders experience more positive emotions with fewer lows. Poets are on the opposite end of the spectrum, experiencing intense negative emotions and fewer positive ones. Judges, on the other hand, have low intensity for both positive and negative emotions, allowing them to make well-balanced decisions. See, according to Brooks, recognizing this emotional typing can play a significant role in managing one's happiness. He also shares his insights about the heritability of happiness, citing studies that show 44/52 of self-evaluated well-being is inherited, meaning one's genetic disposition immensely contributes to one's overall mood balance and happiness levels. Well, the conversation also delves into the compatibility between different mood types, such as extroverts, and Brooks argues that successful partnerships rely on achieving a baseline of compatibility and complementarity, where partners' qualities complete one another, ultimately providing balance in the relationship dynamics. And also highlight the importance of self-regulation, mental habits, and understanding one's emotional tendencies for effective self-management. One key topic they dissect is the interaction between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex in achieving emotional stability, specifically understanding how to control and manage the raw emotions your limbic system generates your emotional factory, which in turn enables one to fully experience emotions in the prefrontal cortex part of the brain. They also discussed that people who tend to be more depressed and hence more creative and romantic use a part of their brain called the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex significantly, which is also used for thinking or ruminating excessively about something or someone, a common behavior when someone is deeply in love or dealing with a business plan. So they also examine extremes through these mood categories and find that it is not necessarily true that the most extreme cases of greatness or the display of genius come from extremes in these categories. And they argue that several successful individuals may maintain decent relationships, moderate themselves, and refrain from drug or alcohol abuse despite some inherent weird or odd personality traits. And what's more, those traits are often managed quite effectively. So lastly, the duo discusses the three components of happiness, which Brooks refers to as the macronutrients of happiness: enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning. But unlike the traditional understanding of these factors, their definitions and the strategies to achieve them are much more nuanced and complex. For example, enjoyment is not just about mere pleasure, but involves people in memory, making it a more sophisticated experience, while pleasure is viewed as a temporary and potentially addictive pursuit that could lead to significant mental health issues. Interestingly, they note that most advertisements, such as those for Anheuser-Busch, illustrate scenes of people enjoying the product together, indirectly associating the product with happiness and enjoyment rather than the pleasure derived from the alcohol. Like, mind you, Dr. Peter Attia and Arthur Brooks continue the discussion by diving into the nature of enjoyment, satisfaction, and pleasure. They highlight a common issue among people: the constant chase for more things, more praise, more approval. And this chase is fueled by a notion in our heads that we'll be eternally satisfied if we just achieve or get a little bit more of something. But the reality is quite different. Brooks introduces the idea of homeostasis, the constant return to our emotional base level. This return to the baseline is what makes the satisfaction we seek fleeting, pushing us onto the unforgiving hedonic treadmill of always wanting more. To break free from this cycle, Brooks advises listeners to reduce their wants rather than constantly trying to increase what they have. This idea, he explains, is at the core of Buddhist teachings. Life is suffering or dissatisfaction because of attachment. One way to reduce this suffering is to manage our wants, effectively changing the focus of satisfaction from acquisition to acceptance and balance. Brooks discusses the counterproductive nature of visualization, a commonly utilized tool for personal growth and achievement. Although it helps in achieving specific goals, over-reliance on visualization contributes to the hedonic treadmill as it encourages the continuous desire for more. Instead, he recommends the concept of AR reverse bucket list, where we list down our worldly attachments and consciously devalue them to avoid overdependence. It's about managing and acknowledging these desires, rather than ignoring or suppressing them. Shifting focus to political views, Brooks recognizes his strong attachments to these opinions and how they contribute to his dissatisfaction. His solution is to write down these politically driven attachments, not to eradicate them, but to manage them. By acknowledging that they're just opinions and are not definitive, Brooks alleviates some of the dissatisfaction associated with these beliefs. Brooks also introduces the difference between enjoyment and pleasure by using the example of alcohol consumption. He argues that pleasure is a fleeting sensation often linked to physiological responses, while enjoyment relates to the meaningful experiences and memories we create with others. Pleasure, when isolated from enjoyment, can lead to maladaptive behaviors such as addiction. The conversation also touches on satisfaction derived from overcoming a struggle or a challenge. However, Brooks warns that finding satisfaction can be deceptive because Mother Nature tricks us into believing that this feeling of contentment will be everlasting when, in fact, according to homeostasis, it's ephemeral. He further illustrates this concept by citing examples from Buddhism, stating that life is essentially unsatisfying due to our innate, continuous desires. In conclusion, Brooks offers a fresh perspective on happiness and satisfaction, urging listeners to shift from a mindset of acquiring more to wanting less. By managing our desires and shifting our focus from fleeting pleasures to shared, meaningful experiences, we can cultivate lasting satisfaction and happiness in our lives. As Dr. Peter Attia and Arthur Brooks delve into the realms of personal and political opinions, they explore how acknowledging our polarizing views can help manage internal dissatisfaction. Brooks suggests acknowledging our strong views, not to nullify them, but to recognize their basis in opinion rather than definitive fact. This approach aligns with the principle of metacognition, or thinking about thinking, which Turner highlights as a way to make conscious executive decisions about our responses. When it comes to dealing with divisive events or opposing political views, the goal isn't to blot out information, but to learn to use it more effectively through metacognition. Brooks shares his experience using a combination of techniques to ration news consumption and prevent it from intruding on his work, demonstrating how one might balance being informed with maintaining emotional balance. What you believe, why you're alive, and what you're willing to die for are the crucial questions that form the backbone of one's sense of purpose and meaning. Brooks shares his adult son's experiences in the Marine Corps as an illustration of how facing challenging circumstances can lead to the realization of one's purpose, cementing a solid sense of meaning. He also suggests that finding persuasive personal answers to these profound questions is a worthwhile philosophical journey, usually undertaken around the age of 50. Coming further into the matter of purpose, they delve into Vedic physics, 4 quarters of life. The first quarter, Baharya, is the learning phase. The second, Gastha, is the householder era of starting a family and focusing on work. Then comes the third quarter, the transitional phase of Vanaprastha, or retirement into the forest, which ensues around age 50. This third phase represents a second adolescence and withdrawal from societal obligations and expectations. And the intriguing aspect discussed here is that our purpose can change with different quarters of life. This purpose isn't always dictated by societal norms, but by personal journeys, beliefs, and life experiences, marking a meaningful shift in the nature of satisfaction from acquisition to balance. This unique perspective encourages listeners to reflect upon and define their sense of purpose rather than allowing societal expectations to dictate their choices. Amidst the discourse, Arthur Brooks advocates for journaling as an effective tool for self-awareness and understanding the roots of our fears, reinforcing the importance of self-reflection within the context of metacognition. Promoting the practice of maintaining journals focused on negative experiences, failures, or dissatisfactions, Brooks emphasizes the benefits of returning to these written accounts after certain periods, such as a month or 6 months. This practice prompts individuals to derive learning from these instances, and in doing so, enables them to transform negative experiences into positive lessons. In the discussion about anxiety, Brooks defines it as unfocused fear, as an onslaught of stress hormones that creates a pervasive, undefined sense of doom. The act of writing down specific fears can shift anxiety from the limbic system, responsible for emotional processing, to the prefrontal cortex. This transition enables one to manage anxiety through metacognitive processes, allowing for a bifurcation between the individual and the anxious emotions they are experiencing. Dr. Attia and Arthur Brooks also unpack the idea of optimism versus hope. By their definitions, they distinguish optimism as more of a prediction, a hopeful outlook for a favorable outcome. While in contrast, hope embodies a sense of empowerment that one can endure or overcome whatever adversity they face. Hope, they agreed, is much more tied to happiness than optimism due to the empowering agency it involves. And finally, they embark on exploring the psychological framework around despair as a condition of hopelessness and disempowerment. This concept leads to a further exploration around external influences, predominantly childhood experiences that may create grounds for despair. Maintaining the narrative thread, they emphasize that despair, much like the fear and anxiety discussed earlier, isn't a permanent state but can be transformed with personalized strategies such as journaling, goal setting, and metacognitive techniques. Arthur Brooks points to a shift in societal trends that correlate to feelings of victimhood and grievance taking front stage in the public consciousness. He suggests that an increasing number of people form part of their self-identity around their victimhood, which in his view is a recipe for hopelessness and despair. The state of the culture today, described as an identity culture, holds victimhood as a virtue, and this plays into the hands of manipulative leaders who use the victimhood of their followers for their own gains, creating an atmosphere of disenfranchisement and systemic disempowerment. Brooks references the dark triad of personality traits that includes narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. These traits, surprisingly prevalent in society at roughly 7%, apply to individuals who exhibit a lack of remorse for negative actions, are manipulative, and have inflated self-perceptions. He implies that such leaders may be more prevalent in politics, contributing to the growing trend of polarization and contempt in society. This dynamic, he argues, is feeding into a state of virtuous victimhood and contributing to a decline in overall happiness. Discussing the arc of happiness during different periods of history, Brooks explains that while people might prefer to live in the present than in the past, there are apprehensions. People may wonder if they would have preferred being born 100 or 200 years from now. The conversation then pivots to review happiness benchmarks given changes in society. Brooks dismisses cross-country comparisons of happiness as invalid due to cultural interpretations of the term, explaining that happiness in a particular country can only be properly examined over time. Looking at the American landscape, Brooks explains that happiness remained relatively constant from the 70s through the 80s. However, it started to decline around 1980-1990. Rounding back to societal trends, he ties this shift to a decline in the four habits of happy people: faith, family, friendship, and work that serves others. He posits that societal and technological changes have contributed to a decline in these areas. Changes in the perception and nature of work could be tied to shifting economic structures away from manufacturing and towards finance, and the rise of remote work has played a part in distancing people from important social interactions. In conclusion, Brooks maps out three major storms that have made significant dents in societal happiness: the introduction of social media, political polarization post the 2016 election, and the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the shift to remote work. Each of these events or shifts brought about changes that further distance people from venues of social interaction and support, contributing to an overall decline in happiness. In this thought-provoking conversation, Dr. Peter Attia and Arthur Brooks explore the nature of happiness and how it has evolved over time. Within this exploration, they scrutinize the powerful yet subtle influences that prevailing societal trends and technological advances can have on one's happiness. Brooks addresses the idea of victimhood and how it's increasingly becoming a part of individuals' self-identity. He blames this on the rising identity culture, which upholds victimhood as a virtue. He warns about leaders who exploit this psychological dynamic, fostering an environment of natural grievance and systemic disempowerment. In analyzing societal trends, Brooks mentions the dark triad of personality traits: narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Roughly 7% of society is said to exhibit these traits, which can lead to an individual disregarding the implications of their negative actions, exhibiting manipulative behavior, and presenting an inflated self-image. I'd like to suggest that such personalities may be prevalent in political spheres, fostering a growing societal trend of polarization and contempt. The conversation then takes a historical turn, exploring the mutations of happiness over different stages of history. Brooks suggests people today might be apprehensive about whether they would have preferred to be born a century or two from now, despite preferring their current existence to the past. The conversation then examines the benchmarks of happiness, considering the societal changes that have taken place. Looking at demographic patterns, Brooks reveals that happiness levels among Americans remained relatively constant from the 70s through the 80s before starting to decline around the late 80s. Brooks ties this shift to a decline in the four habits of happy people: faith, family, friendship, and doing work which serves others. And expounding on these concepts, Brooks explains that societal and technological shifts have played a role in mitigating these pillars of happiness. The rise of remote work, as well as shifting economic parameters, has led to changes in the nature of work and people's attitudes towards it. And Brooks identifies three storms that have had a radical impact on societal happiness: the introduction of social media, political polarization, post-2016 election, and the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. These events have fostered changes that distance people from social interaction and support, subsequently facilitating an overall decline in happiness. Interestingly, Brooks points out the significance of discipline in pursuing happiness. He emphasizes the need for individuals to actively pursue happiness irrespective of ephemeral feelings or momentary desires. All this pursuit of happiness as a steadfast decision, rather than a feeling, parallels his views on love, which he sees as a commitment, a decision to wish good upon another. Dr. Attia and Brooks also delve into the role of transcendence and spiritual practice in promoting happiness. Brooks advocates for seeking transcendence through nature, spirituality, or religion as a means to a happier existence. For those individuals who live in concrete jungles, Brooks suggests seeking transcendence in other forms, such as religion, meditation, or other manifestations of human genius, such as music and art. To sum it up, this insightful discussion between Dr. Attia, Arthur Brooks pulls back the layers on happiness, offering crucial insights into its construct and the influences shaping its prevalence in society today. And their dialogue illuminates the need for individuals to reclaim control and actively pursue happiness, embracing a disciplined approach, and making a mental shift away from victimhood. In an ongoing discussion on happiness, Dr. Peter Attia and Arthur Brooks delve deeper into the structure and mechanics of happiness. Brooks differentiates between two cardinal types of human problems: complicated and complex. Complicated problems are tricky to solve and require significant computational resources. Yet, once solved, the solution is endlessly replicable. Complex problems, however, are easy to comprehend, but impossible to resolve due to the infinite permutations of variables involved. Utilizing the complexity of racing matches as an example, he outlines that each match, though having the same end goal, follows a unique and unpredictable route due to a multitude of varying factors. And this analogy translates to human problems. They are laden with variables, with outcomes dependent on individuals' unique circumstances. Brooks holds that our society attempts to solve complex problems like love with comparable solutions, such as social media. However, he believes this approach is futile and leaves us worse off. Brooks also brings up the act of apping happiness, stating that though a complex phenomenon, it can be pursued by making consistent effort. He suggests keeping track of personal progress through a spreadsheet system where one can measure various dimensions of happiness. This assists individuals in understanding where they stand and making desired adjustments. In this measurement system, while not perfect, is described by Brooks as a curve fit into complex problems, dissecting a big problem into numerous smaller ones, enabling a manageable approach to solution. These measurable micronutrients of happiness range from things like assessing the warmth of one's marriage, relationships with children, career progress, philanthropy levels, professional interests, avoiding conflicts, etc. Dr. Attia and Brooks explore the concept of minimizing the I-self to enhance happiness. They share psychologist William James's concept of the I-self and the me-self. The I-self embodies our comprehension of the external world, and the me-self is our reflection of ourselves. In modern society, Brooks believes the focus on myself outweighs the I-self, leading to a state of self-obsession. He suggests minimizing this focus can lead to greater happiness by encouraging more outward observation. Brooks shares an interesting example of a fitness professional who decided to stop tormenting himself with excessive self-scrutiny and got rid of all his mirrors to enjoy his life. The fitness professional's bold step gave Brooks further assurance about the merit of his theory about reducing our self's obsession for a more fulfilling life. Finally, Dr. Attia broaches some intriguing aspects for potential exploration, like the concept of dashboard of happiness, an effective model to assess happiness, and the potential merit of sharing Brooks's multidimensional happiness spreadsheet to provide concrete help to others seeking the pathway to happiness. The episode proceeds with Arthur Brooks shedding light on an evolution in his understanding of happiness, marked by a shift from an external, observational stance towards a transformative, internal approach. Initially, Brooks likened his study of happiness to being an astronomer. He observed the patterns and inclinations of happy and unhappy people from a distance. As a person naturally inclined towards negative effects, he had resigned himself to believe happiness wasn't his lot. However, this mirrored an astronomer's limitation. They can study the stars, but can't move them. Brooks eventually discerned that with the evolving knowledge from social science and neuroscience, he could in fact apply theories of happiness to alter his own life, similar to an engineer builds bridges within their control, a shift from an astronomer to an engineer. Owing to this realization, Brooks puts himself through various happiness exercises before suggesting them to his audiences, effectively being his lab rat. According to him, these exercises have led to a significant increase in his overall well-being, with a 60% rise in the past 4 years. This journey affirms his belief that anyone can cultivate happiness. Or Brooks further elaborates that his pursuit of happiness does not revolve around trying to be the happiest guy. This approach prevents him from feeling fraudulent when he experiences occasional negative moods, thus averting the detrimental pressure of maintaining a facade of perpetual happiness. Dr. Attia and Brooks interact candidly, mutual admirers of each other's work. They value the impact they have on their audiences, guiding people towards a healthier, happier life using science-backed methods. Their conversation reassures listeners that chasing happiness doesn't necessitate the abandonment of negative emotions, but is more about learning to navigate life's complexities and mastering the balance. Ultimately, like astronomers decoding cosmic mysteries or engineers bridging gaps, Brooks advises listeners to delve deeply into the science behind happiness and construct their unique paths towards contentment.